Among other things that are in the public sphere of discussion is the fact that boards, should they resign, should they be allowed to continue? And again, like yesterday, I am concerned, or maybe concerned is not so much the correct word, maybe a little confused, or maybe a little perturbed, that the debate tends to be generally presented in a simplified manner. Now again, as I asked yesterday, is it because of the news reporting? Generally speaking, 9 times out of 10, the news will report to the level of detail of what was said. Now, to what extent should journalists go beyond the level of detail of what was said? Because then that potentially means that you're ascribing meaning that was not intended by the speaker. If you assume details or you try to provide potential details or potential context. The flip side is if you don't do that, then are you a journalist or are you a parrot? Right? And then every now and then there's potential that the media will miss a detail, miss a context that was outwardly given. So this situation with state boards and the turnover between one administration to another, it's a semi-controversial issue. And the reason I say it's semi-controversial and not outright controversial is, to some extent, this is one of the things that has kind of been happening all the time. All the time being relative, of course. It's not like we change our governments every 5 years. Sometimes you get a 2-term incumbent, etc., etc. And of course, elections are every 5 years. So technically, we haven't necessarily seen this in this context. Yes, they may have had changes to the boards during the Keith Rowley administration, Dr. Keith Rowley administration, but we haven't had a transition of power for 10 years. So now there's an interesting point made, and I don't know if to what extent people thought about it, and it might be one of those things that seems obvious when it's said out loud, but until it's said out loud, most people may not necessarily register or consider it. And that is the fact that, look, it's one thing if you're looking at certain state boards or agencies or what have you. It's another thing when you're looking at publicly traded companies of which the state has ownership in. Now, in some cases, the state has majority. In other cases, the state does not. Either way, there are private shareholders whose needs, whose interests also needs to be considered when speaking about the board members that are being removed or retained or what have you. Now, this basically brings up the fact that the news, they had a pretty good article on this where 2 speakers, I think Vasan Bharat and Mariano Brown, gave their opinion, and essentially what they're arguing is, while it might be a common political convention that even in these circumstances there would be a transition and a turnover, legally, at least in some cases, there might be no legal requirement for it to happen because of the fact that they're publicly traded companies, they are private shareholders, and especially when the government doesn't have a majority stake, in which case there's nothing the government should be able to do to compel the board to turn over, to compel people to leave the board. Now, in some cases, various individuals did leave the boards of institutions in such situations. But then the fact that, legally speaking, there is no requirement in these circumstances brings back the question of, should it be done? And one of the things, from what I understand, when the PNM came in, and correct me if I'm wrong, but when the PNM came in 10 years ago, they did their own turnover and put their own people in. And now to say that there should be some continuity is questionable, right? In fact, arguably, they tried to turn over their own party and had to reverse that decision. And one of the beneficiaries of that reversal is the current opposition leader. So, to some extent, yes, she can speak from a place of saying maintaining continuity is good. I don't know if she'll go all the way with her own personal example. So, it brings a different perspective on the situation. And dare I say, it challenges the status quo. Now, to some extent, the government, the Prime Minister is saying, good people will be retained. I think part of the issue is, how do you trust such promises when precedent set in the past is contrary to that? Now, granted, this new UNC administration is not quite in the same mold as the Kamala Prasad, I can't speak for the rest of the UNC, but the past People's Partnership administration. But again, the political environment is not one where people are quick to accept someone saying, no, we're not going to do what we've normally done. We're not going to be as ruthless as most politicians normally have been. I mean, the PNM also is technically suffering under the weight of past precedent when they have concerns about hidden groups whose members are anonymous criticizing senior leadership in the party or senior holdovers in the party. And while I understand that they want to say, yes, come out in the light and say what you have to say in the open, the reality is in politics, you don't always want to be the nail that sticks up just to be hammered down. So I think the status quo of where we just turn over people, while I understand it, while, you know, it makes sense practically, you don't want people who are against you to hold significant positions of authority that could undermine your policy decisions. The flip side to that is, it's almost like we are putting the cart before the horse. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy each time. We assume this is going to happen, so we have to preempt it before we actually see that it happens. It's actually similar to the problem that the government has when they say, well, you know, people of quality will be retained. Yeah, but we assume that that won't happen, so we have to preempt that. That's probably what's in the minds of a lot of people on these boards who are holding out, basis, to loosely use a phrase. So part of it is our own expectations, even for people in the system, but then also for the public itself. What is the public willing to accept? How do we want to operate moving forward? Because dare I say, even if everything went smoothly, it most likely would be smooth based under pre-existing norms. And pre-existing norms, I would argue, are not necessarily the healthiest thing, but we just accept it. And I think we need to come to terms with the fact that a lot of what we accept, it's not because it's the best thing for us. It's not because it's better than the alternative. It's because it's just easier. And there is an old saying, I don't know how much it's widespread in TNT, or maybe it's not an old saying, maybe I just picked it up from a book somewhere. But basically it says nothing worth doing is ever easy. If it was worth doing, it's most likely going to be hard. Because if it's worth doing, that means that it hasn't been done yet. And one of the main reasons why certain things haven't been done yet in a society, when you have new ground to tread, it's not easy to be a pioneer. It's not easy to solve the mountain of a problem. People may have tried in the past, but it hasn't been done yet. It hasn't been done yet because it's not easy. If it was easy, this one other people should know, if it was easy, everybody would do it. All right, let's not spend too much time on this. One of the other things coming out of the whole One Caribbean Music Festival and how that went down is the debate now with regards to artists and what artists demands. And apparently there were local artists, I didn't know this, there were local artists who also didn't show up. And it seems as though the issues of the event was not just limited to the foreign performers. Now, the Newsday has an article on this. The headline references Iowa George, right? I perform for the people, not money. Because apparently he wasn't slated to perform, but he reached out anyway once he realized that certain acts probably weren't going to go on stage. Kudos to him, I appreciate that. And maybe he should try to be a little bit more neutral and not risk implicating his peers. I don't think he directly meant to do it. Maybe I'm wrong. But the report, and one of the things that I find it's a shame, the headline doesn't necessarily reference the second part of the article itself, which is considerably larger and speaks to the experiences of the entertainers who did not show up, the local entertainers. One in particular, who is pointing to the fact that, look, there were certain details that was never confirmed towards the end, and apparently, potentially, because I don't think she said it, she said the details of how, but the running order, the itinerary last minute for the show may have been changed. And the change in the itinerary may have caused her cost to increase. And by her cost increasing, now maybe her cost didn't need to increase. She didn't spell it out, so we're just going with what the performer said. I believe this is Janelle J. Angel De Leon. But I can understand where she's coming from, because it's not that easy to produce a quality production. And every artist that goes to one of these festivals essentially produces a show, a mini show, in the middle of the concert, right? They are to some extent responsible, and usually you want it this way. The artist wants to have control over aspects of the performance. You're not just going to come, it's not like a church show or a school show where, you know, okay, if you don't have your own music, we have a house band or we have a house DJ or something. No, you need to have certain things under your control with your people so that you could rehearse, so that everything will go smoothly because it's within your expectations, because it's within your control. So when she said the price increase or things change and it caused the economics of her performance to change and she had to pull out, I kind of understand that. Now granted, I don't know how true it is with regard to the details, but on principle, I kind of understand that. Because part of what the debate on this whole situation is the professionalism of the industry. And we don't know to what extent was it the fault of the promoter of the concert or it was the fault of the artist. But given that it's both local and foreign artists and more than one in each case that pulled out, the questions towards the promoter are probably greater than the questions towards the artist. So all of this has brought up questions about professionalism. But I think we now, the people of TNT, underestimate what it takes to put on a professional show. They have certain music festivals like Coachella and the like, the Super Bowl halftime show. In some of those cases, the artists aren't paid. And the fancier the production value of their performances, that means the more out of pocket they go into. But they do it because those kinds of platforms are so great. It helps legitimize their career and their level of fame and the amount of money they could demand with regards to ticket prices when they tour or other appearance fees. So now we have our local concert. And if we want to be professional, and we have a situation where our industry is not professional, right? Soca Monarch, at least most of the times in its last iteration, how often were there complaints about runtime and the like? And it takes a lot for artists to get to that level, and I guess promoters need to not take it for granted. It's not just that an artist comes by themselves, they drive themselves to the venue, maybe they have one person with them and that's it. She talked about, look, there was wardrobe, so that's outfit, shoes, hair, makeup, right? But then also security, a driver, a road manager, and a DJ. And you could argue, why does she need all that amount of people, 4 people with her? Well, the problem is, while in theory, yes, you could maybe argue, you kind of take a couple jobs and put them under one hat, have one person do it. When you're hiring people to do something professionally, it's not that simple. And the more they do, the more they will want to charge anyway. But this is how the heavy professional machines are run, with enough people to make sure everything goes smoothly. And if we want to up our game, we need to kind of understand that too. That's part of the industry's growth, that there are more specialists to handle things, to focus on things in a professional manner. so that it's done well, not just that it's kind of done halfway, and then why the show taking so long? Why is she looking like that? Why it sounding so bad? Again, it's a window, and perhaps this time it's not so much for the public to be part of the debate, although it would help for the public to understand that these things aren't cheap. But it's a window for the industry perhaps to debate amongst itself what it wants to look like moving forward. Because I'm not saying that it needs to just overbloat itself with all kind of different hangers-on the entourage for no reason. But we need to figure it out. All right, I have to mention it. A woman was scammed of $3,000 after making an online payment for a vehicle she thought she was purchasing on, and I hate to say it because I don't think it's any fault of their own. It's not the fault of the platform, at least to some extent, right? Facebook Marketplace. She responded to an ad, work to own, made a deposit, and then I guess the seller began deleting messages of their prior conversation and ghosted the poor lady. And all I'll say is this: the police warns about Facebook Marketplace all the time. Here's the thing: never, 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 never be trusting on online transactions like that. You need proof of everything. And I guess WhatsApp is not enough because messages could be deleted. So, first of all, if you're doing it that way, screenshot everything. Emails might be better because I don't think you could delete. I don't think there's an email service. I could be wrong, but traditionally, that way you could delete the emails on the other person's side. But you need some sort of proof of a proper transaction. That way, because there's no way to foolproof it where you are guaranteed to get the goods once you pay. But what you need is proof of the transaction so you could go after the individual. And even better, some form of verification of the individual's identity. And the internet allows for too much anonymity. A WhatsApp number and a name and a picture means nothing if you've never met the person in person. So this is just one of those things. Be very wary. Of course, going with cash to buy the vehicle is no better. It's no safer. There are risks with that too. So part of it is trying to figure out the trustworthiness of who you're dealing with, if it's even a real person. As long as new technology comes up, there will be new ways to exploit unwary victims. And we need to be more cognizant of the fact, because at the very least, and as different methods become obsolete, as the public becomes aware of it, fraudsters will find new methods. So it's not just about learning how to defeat one fraud. It's being vigilant on the fact that you can be defrauded, and therefore you need to, if necessary, insist on certain things. And depending on the situation, you probably should maybe reach out to whoever your local community police organization is for more advice on what might be things to look out for. Or even maybe, I don't know if you have a financial advisor or if you have a lawyer, even if it's just a friend. But generally speaking, the only way to safeguard against these things for sure is to not participate in them. And I understand that the deals, of course, are things that people can't pass up, but just realize, depending, you may be taking a risk with your money, and hopefully it hasn't happened yet with your life. All right, the pariah victims' families, they are asking now for workmen's compensation or compensation based on the Workmen's Compensation Act. This potentially goes to the fact that the situation is not as straightforward as it could be, or that the current administration is no more diligent on the matter than the previous administration. I'm not entirely sure which way it goes, right? But we have to kind of wait and see how it is, because this is a bit disappointing to me, and I'm sure it is extremely far more disappointing to the families and to the survivor. But while it might seem as though it's a case where, oh, well, look, the PNM didn't do it, UNC, they still can't get it done, because one would think, how hard is it to release $5 million? Maybe on a technical level, it might be that hard. But at the end of the day, though, one entity met the situation and has been in power for a month, and the other one only spoke to the situation at the last minute after a couple of years. Given the fact that a lot of those MPs were not seen during the last 9 years in their constituencies, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit things left unfinished in the last 9 to 10 years, one wonders, just what were they doing? What were they doing? Were they in a certain red building listening to the platitudes of, well, let me just leave it there. Let me not go any further. The frustration will boil over. Last thing before we take the break. the United States, is warning against people who want to do what should be a very well-known trick to us in TNT, who want to go to the States, either applying for visas to go to the States while pregnant to have the baby in the States, or using pre-existing visas to go to the States to have their baby in the States. Part of the reason why they have an issue with this is using U.S. government assistance to pay for their medical care. And they're warning, if you travel for the primary purpose of giving birth, that whoever does that may not be eligible to renew their visa in the future. Now, here's the thing, at the end of the day, I was never comfortable with the concept of going abroad and having a baby just so that they will have naturalized citizenship or birth tourism. I always found that to be really sketchy. I know my parents did not do that with me. Now, the thing is, to some extent, I actually didn't necessarily understand how and why it was allowed to be legal in the first place. But it was what it was, and I guess it reached a boiling point now where the government of at least one of the 2 or 3 countries involved, because Canada's the other country that's normally done, but I guess in Canada's case, they really, really, really want to not have their population decline. So they might not mind as much. But at some point, if you abuse something too much, then the authorities are going to take notice, and now I guess Peter is paying for Paul, but it is what it is. I can't really fault the United States government for this. I do think to some extent it is a bit crazy for the American government to say that just because you're born there, we're going to make it so that you're not automatically a citizen. But I do believe that that right should generally be for the people who are actually living there. Now, immigrants who have children, should their children be U.S. citizens? Probably. But for people who just go there to give birth to come back, just so that they can get a passport, that seems real kind of... I mean, why would you then be entitled to citizenship then? What would be the tie to the nation? Because all nations have that to consider. You want to claim to be a citizen of our country, yet you don't actually live as a citizen of our country. All right. I'm sure a lot of people will be upset because I am speaking against something that they've done or they agree with. And well, unfortunately, it's not about what I would like to do personally. It's about how I see it. And that kind of crazy loophole to me makes me rather uncomfortable. But enough about that. Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to the Daily Review. Stay tuned. This is Dr. Manna WSN Show. Michael Small. We'll be right back with more after this.
Struggling with heart health or frequent migraines? Discover the simple steps to reclaim your energy and vitality.
We're diving into a topic that affects about 422 million people around the world: diabetes.
Tune into Wellness Unlocked, the series that delivers expert advice, practical tips, and inspiring stories to help you take control of your health and well-being. Your health matters. Don't miss Wellness
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well, that's a pretty high compliment. Coming from an expert.
Always, we appreciate you starting your day with us. Let's get into this morning's first conversation.
Is the country's healthcare system more at risk, more than ever?
Why it has remained unaddressed for so long.
Political parties get lots of cash, big cash from financiers, and then when they get that now, you can't account for it.
But it's really the specialist nurses who we are in a greater shortfall for.
We can tap into the resources and have them, at least form some mentorship programs.
Highlight our food systems, and which will attract persons from all over the world to come and experience something that actually supports the local economy.
We're lucky that we have a vibrant legal system that allows change to take place, and it's not that matters are just swept under the carpet and discrimination is allowed to be perpetrated.
A lot of people don't know that there were attempts to ban the carnival, suppress the carnival.
Knowing how to tell authentic is as easy as 1, 2, 3. Find it, match it, search it. Step 1. Find the style number on the tag. Step 2. Match the style number inside the jersey with the number on the tag. Step 3. Search it. A quick Google search of the style number will verify the jersey is authentic when the search results match the jersey being searched. Don't be fooled by counterfeit jerseys. Before you buy, remember to find it, match it, search it.
Fan Zone, 2 locations nationwide. Center City Mall, Chaguanas and Movietown, Port of Spain. Nationwide delivery available.
Welcome back to Talking Points, and now we go into the daily review. This morning, one of the interesting stories coming that hit me this morning is the fact that Venezuela is claiming that terrorists tried to enter their country via Trinidad and Tobago. Now, the route was the Sucre region, so it's not very... Yeah, that odd-shaped tip there right next to us. So apparently, I guess you could say from West Trinidad, people of Ukrainian, Colombian, and I think American descent. Americans, Ukrainians, and Colombians, right? Armed with weapons, attempted to, a rebel group. So first it was terrorists, then it was a rebel group, right? Attempted to enter into Venezuela. And apparently they caught them, they have them. This is a key point. They claim that they caught them. And now that they're, well, the question is, who are they throwing under the bus here? Because some perception is that it's with regards to ongoing issues with Colombia. But to some extent, we're being caught up in all of this, right? And on the surface, initial reaction is, there is potential for this to be true because let's face it, Does anyone really think that our Coast Guard has a tightly woven net that will prevent anything in the country from being funny business happening in our waters? Because we could barely keep stuff from coming in. So then, exactly what do we have to prevent stuff, unwanted stuff, from going out? Now, the Ministry of Defense, not the Minister, the Ministry of Defense, they have claimed that this situation, there was a comprehensive investigation where preliminary findings indicate that there is currently no evidence to support these allegations. So, I understand that these kinds of things, they're very sensationalized, right? It's not like there's a history of people smuggling arms and individuals from Trinidad to Venezuela. Now, one of the things that I thought of is, are these terrorists and rebels, or could they just be, I don't know, drug dealers, international, transnational criminals? And of course, stuff is smuggled from Venezuela to Trinidad and Tobago. Why can't these individuals attempt to go back to Latin America via Venezuela? Of course, the report again said Americans and Ukrainians, which I also find very interesting. It's almost like if the Venezuelan government is thinking, oh, well, Ukraine, America, they're supposed to be somewhat friends, right? Despite the fact that Vladimir Zelensky and Donald Trump, plus J.D. Vance, don't necessarily seem to be eye to eye like this, but maybe this is the inability to fully understand the nuances of the international politics and relations of the situation by certain members of the Venezuelan government, that, hey, let's just lump Ukrainians in there. Because part of me wonders, and maybe I'm wrong, unless there's some wider contra affair, you know, America conspiracy theory going on there, why would any Ukrainians who potentially are of fighting age want to be involved with Venezuela? Does Ukraine need oil and gas, and America is telling Ukraine, hey, well, you know, we would get it from Venezuela, but they're acting a fool, so come help us deal with them. Like, that's a bridge too far on the conspiracy theory for me. Because generally speaking, I would assume most Ukrainians that are willing to commit acts of violence and be part of any paramilitary exercise, they're probably in Ukraine. Their whole country is fighting a war of survival. And the kind of person that might have the skills to smuggle stuff in and commit terrorist acts, I don't know. I don't know if you know, I don't know if you saw, but Ukraine kind of hit Russia pretty well with a highly complex operation. Now again, maybe there's some strange reason for them to be looking at Venezuela. But unless we have something more than that, that's a little too far for me. That's a little too much. Again, we have transnational criminals, essentially, one could assume, going back and forth across the border. Why does it have to be terrorists? Now, of course, again, so the Ukrainian claim is kind of weird without more context. Of course, it's natural American Colombians. These are all perceived enemies or threats, potentially, to the Venezuelan state. Fortunately, they didn't say TNT nationals. But again, the Ministry of Defense did point out to say the initial assessment, this is not a thing. The only issue I have is the fact that I have zero confidence, literally zero, that local authorities have a proper handle of our maritime borders and thus can say with confidence what could or could not have potentially happened. We ain't even reached to what did or did not happen. I don't even think they could give us probabilities at this point. And we could take those probabilities with, you know, with any degree of satisfaction or confidence. And this is not directly the fault of Wayne Sturge and the current administration. This is the situation we find ourselves in, and perhaps what I'm hoping for is this might potentially kind of open some eyes to say, hey, maybe we need to fix some of these problems toot sweet before something more direct happens that causes us grief and that causes us to suffer losses. Because again, to what extent is Venezuela's claims aimed at us, or potentially are we just the scapegoats in whatever the situation turns out to be? But there's more than that though, because one of the daily newspapers took note of Venezuela's social media, right? Oh, and let's not forget, there's a bounty apparently on Maduro's head. So that whole thing about Nicolas Maduro being a recognized, respected, duly elected leader of Venezuela by the United States, that whole claim made on the election campaign by the other candidate, I don't even want to say his name because I don't want to pile on, but yeah. But what he did is looked at Venezuelan social media. You could read it for yourself. This was in the Guardian's report. Different comments on social media of the different media houses page, right? So there was a pro-government supporter that they highlighted. That comment, we must stop them with these foreign mercenaries and the local traitors of the country and apply the death penalty by decree. Because you know whenever anyone says death penalty by decree, obviously they are champions of democracy. This is a supporter saying it, technically not the government. But if a supporter is more than willing to say, let the government have death penalty by decree, that means there's no trial. That means there's no evidence. That means there's no due process. Because at any moment they can succeed in all their attempts to plant explosives, attack on institutions, state officials, etc. Because right now Venezuela has that major problem of the elected officials being taken out by all these terrorists. The flip side to that is, there was a critic that commented, you Maduro, are a violator of human rights, ha ha ha. There was another one pointing out the bounty. There was another one saying, they, meaning the government, already started with its science fiction movie where they discover everything. And then, and this one is the most telling, if true, one of the critics had a comment, someone explained to me how this government catches terrorists and doesn't introduce them to society. And then they go on to provide context on why that's important. They capture chicken thief and present it to the press. So it's true. If they apparently want to parade low-level criminals to the media and say, look at all the good we did, well then how is it that when you have such a high-profile thing and you claim that you've caught Ukrainians and Americans and Colombians, just the Ukrainian part of it and the American part of it, you would think, yes, parade them in front of the press. Because if they had them, they would do that because that's a real good way to embarrass what is probably their main enemy right now, the United States and the administration of Donald Trump. Do that. Why wouldn't they do that? What in the history of Nicolas Maduro's regime would suggest restraints for the sake of international diplomacy? So now the question is, you know, again, are we kind of caught up in the wake? Because the sad part about all of this is, while I don't believe the claims of the Venezuelans, I do believe that potentially something did happen, and it's a result of our porous borders. And at the end of the day, this is one of the things that I think Stuart Young, I ended up naming him, and other people don't necessarily understand. Just because you're a world leader doesn't mean you have to be reasonable. That's why, at some point, I mean, think about it. For our own prime minister, at some point, the public gets fed up. The public says, you are too unreasonable, we want to vote you out, right? So why do we assume that other heads of state somehow are magically just going to be these reasonable people that we could work with, that are going to be understanding, that are going to be predictable enough? Or maybe that's just the desperate assumption of someone that wants a result and can't understand why the world won't conform to his needs. And that is a common feeling in human psychology. And as brilliant as he is, maybe that is, to some extent, showing that Stuart Young is merely human, and maybe if he's too human, too ordinary. Because it's not as though our politicians, whether UNC or PNM, are of the practice to show us extraordinary. No, they generally show us that they're very ordinary people with very ordinary faults, and very ordinary faults when you're managing the lives of other people, it's not always a good thing. So we can't, as much as I want to agree and dismiss these claims, I can't fully dismiss them out of hand, because the vulnerability that could allow it to happen on our end exists. And now, again, I will reiterate, this is a challenge to our government. You want to deal with the crime situation and you don't deal with the border security where stuff is smuggled in and out all the time, where the American law enforcement agencies basically know, I think it's safe to assume at this point, that American law enforcement agencies and the Justice Department more or less does not have a lot of confidence in our national security apparatus. So, what are we going to do to fix it? With that said, let's move on to the next story. Now, this is just a follow-up to previous commentary, so there isn't too much known here, but because it's in the papers, I don't want to let it pass. I don't want to give it a significant amount of time. The former chief magistrate at the center of a firestorm of controversy has now been confirmed by the judiciary to put it simply, this might not be technical, but Marcia Caesars has been confirmed to have been assigned to the Civil High Court, the resumption of her duties as a High Court judge. Now, the thing is, her lawyer, Ramesh Lawrence Maraj, in one of the daily newspaper stories, this one is in Newsday, he has mentioned at the end of the story, and he is quoted of saying this: the judicial system has worked because it has vindicated the wrong which was done to her, and it is an important victory for the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. And technically everything he said there, from my understanding, as a non-lawyer, as a non-judge, as a non-legal professional, everything he said there is correct. And more importantly, it's what he should say, both as the lawyer representing Marcia Caesar and with regards to standing up to the principles that he mentioned. The important victory for the independence of the judiciary and the rule of law. Because at the end of the day, two wrongs don't make a right. It can't be a tit for tat. You did wrong, so I could do wrong now, but I'll be right in my wrong because you did wrong first. That's not how it works. I don't necessarily think that the Chief Justice intended to do Marcia Caesar dirty. But herein lies the rub. Two wrongs don't make a right. The problem is Marcia Caesar is the one that did wrong first. And the Privy Council ruling, as much as it supported this situation and allowed her to be reinstated, it also mentioned the fact that disciplinary proceedings could have been undertaken. And I guess part of the issue with this is that they didn't go through the course of the proceedings where she could have her say, the evidence could be heard, and determination could be made on the merits of the case. It was circumvented by the Chief Justice, who I believe was trying to do her a favor, but that's just my belief. I believe he was trying to quiet down the firestorm because the court of public opinion would have crucified her. But now all of a sudden, the court of public opinion is ignoring her because there may or may not be other agendas against the Chief Justice. The fact of the matter remains that it's nice, Senior Counsel Maraj, I believe, or I don't know if he's Senior Counsel, I can't remember. But it is nice that Marcia Caesar had the wrong done to her rectified. On principle, I agree with it. I don't necessarily agree with it with regards to ethics, I think it's right for her to be a high court judge now after what she did. But on principle, I agree with it, because you don't want to set these precedents where things could be managed informally and willy-nilly, and because that opens the door to unfair treatment, to illegal treatment, to malicious treatment. The problem is, and I will borrow his quote, it has vindicated the wrong which was done to her. That's nice. Who now is going to ensure that the wrong done to all of the defendants in the apartheid matters that had to be restarted after what she did, regardless of what the Chief Justice's responsibilities that he did or did not meet? The fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, whether or not the Chief Justice should have done more in that situation to try to prevent it, it was I.S. Caesar who purposefully, intentionally, because it's hard to say that she unintentionally said, oh, well, all my stuff is finished and wrapped up and concluded. I don't think you could claim oopsie on this one. So who is going to vindicate the wrong done to all of the defendants in that case? Because, and this is where maybe the Privy Council, they couldn't say more, but maybe I wish they could have said more, and maybe depending on how the government's handling or the judiciary's side of the case was represented, they could have said more. I'm not sure. But we're in a situation where our legal system takes far too long. Far too long. And if the Privy Council is basically saying, oh, well, you know, 5 years on death row, that's bad. Well, I would like to know what it's like when the average time for some of these cases is already far too long to then be restarted halfway through, basically, not necessarily technically. What does that mean for these defendants? And the reports are that the current administration is going to look into the matter. That's nice. I fear, though, that to some extent I agree. What was done to her could not have been left unchallenged. It needed to be dealt with. But what she did also cannot be left unchallenged. If it is, then she would have gotten away with one. And the fact that the public outcry is one-sided on a matter that has two faults, to me, is an issue. And the fact that the legal profession is one-sided on a matter that has two faults is an issue to me. And this is one of the reasons why I don't always agree in the individual details of each situation. But when whatever administration he did, what's it called, or the Law Association or whoever else, to some extent I understand. You want to take a principled stance? Take a principled stance on all of the wrong done in this matter, not just the ones that pushes whatever agenda you may or may not have. All right, let's move on. Hit at least one more story before we end this part of the program. Now, I'm not too sure exactly what to make of this. 67 new SUVs were added to the TPS's vehicular fleet at a cost of $23 million, right? This, according to the Acting Commissioner of Police, they're looking to increase or decrease the response times, right? This is one quote: "These vehicles are not just tools, they are symbols of our commitment for faster response times, greater visibility in our neighborhoods, and also to enhance our capabilities." 67 new, I think it's all of the same model, Toyota RAV4 SUVs. One of the issues is, to what extent are these just normal consumer cars, consumer vehicles, and to what extent are these beefed up vehicles for police use, as would be the case in a lot of foreign jurisdictions, depending. The reason why is the wear and tear on police vehicles, as Gary Griffith pointed out, when the then PNM administration took issue with the police wanting SUVs, was that, look, these vehicles, the amount of use that they're taken on, because in a lot of cases, it's 3 shifts a day, so they're driven essentially 24 hours, right? they're going to need a lot with regards to maintenance. Now, therein lies your rub, though. To what extent is the maintenance for the police service being done well? And to what extent are only SUVs needed? Because I could understand that there are places where, look, having an SUV for accessibility, the roads are bad, there might be no roads. The police need to be able to go certain places. It's not just all urbanized concrete jungles that the TTPS operate in. But perhaps maybe in urbanized concrete jungles, they need SUVs. Other jurisdictions have cars. We used to have cars. Do we still have cars? And part of it also is, whenever you see a police car with one driver, that's not on patrol. We know this because, generally speaking, it's been implied by so many statements by police officers, single officers don't go out on patrol on their own. And to what extent is that a reasonable use of police resources? Because it's a police car. Now, I get it. They might have various duties to see about. Maybe they have to go to courts. Maybe they have to go and deal with something in another station, some kind of administrative function, or what have you. But we can't sit back and say, oh, well, police procurement is smooth. Procurement by any government agency is always an area where you will run into problems. You will have risks of excess, of mismanagement, and potentially corruption. And any kind of paramilitary procurement, maybe one could argue, has an increased level of risk because you could hide all kind of costs in there. So the Minister of Homeland Security, he is saying the purchase of the vehicles was long in coming and smiling, saying today is a good day. And I think he's saying this because of his experience as a police officer, and he kind of knows the resource constraints. So to some extent, as much as I want to warn of the potential downfalls of this, can I say that it is not needed? No, I can't say that. Because he's pointing to the increased presence and visibility of police, which is something that technically we want. Look, at the end of the day, we might lament the fact that the state of emergency did not solve crime, but at the very least it helped suppress crime. And as of last month, the murder rate has continued to be suppressed. Of course, we don't necessarily know with 100% accuracy why, but one can't necessarily assume that heightened police presence did not factor in, at least to some extent. And a police presence, I don't think will ever be considered a negative. So, apparently this is the latest tranche of 160 vehicles being purchased by the TTPS, all in the last 8 months. A lot of it are SUVs or vans, different makes and models. We have to wait and see how these are. Apparently this was all done well. The timing of it, I do question. Who made the decision? When was the funds released? Was this done by the current administration, the previous administration? It's not clear to me on the reporting. When I initially read the story and even this morning. I guess we have to wait and see. The thing is, this is perpendicular to the debate. Well, I don't know if it was much of a debate, but I thought that it was an unnecessary debate of body armor versus body cameras. So, again, we have to wait and see. Are they going to find all the money that's necessary, find all the money that they need? I don't know. But at this point, because of the level of crime, while maybe a couple of years ago I wouldn't have had this stance, I do actually think that committing resources to the TTPS is necessary. But at the cost of what? What will be the opportunity cost? What will we be willing to sacrifice? And this is why leadership is hard. And this is why I would argue this is an indicator of why the leadership of the previous administration failed. Because it's not about prioritizing things that are obvious. If you're a family and your budget is tight, cost of living is too high, you prioritize food over video games. That's easy, right? Now, do you prioritize food over rent? Because if you don't pay the rent, you'll be kicked out of the apartment. That's not so easy. And it's decisions like that with regards to the budget that the government has to make. And I fear that the previous administration didn't really take on those things well enough and understand what they meant. So now the current administration, they are now faced with the same challenge. What do you prioritize? Because there are a lot of needs, and arguably there are more needs than we can afford. So some needs potentially might have to be ignored, at least for now. And I would argue that the TTPS is not one of those needs that should be ignored. So what is the opportunity cost? I don't know. The reason why it's so hard is because it's not just TTPS versus fire service. It's all of the various services of national security and the Ministry of Education and so on and so on and so on and so on. Road safety, flood mitigation, public utilities, because the bill to TNTech, the government has a floating $1 billion owing every year or month or whatever. Yes, they make payments off, but it's still a $1 billion behind. That's a hell of a way to live, right? We can't even pay ourselves. All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we have comments to get through. We'll open up the phone lines. There are more stories to talk about. You can mention it if you so choose, but we have to take a break right now. When we come back, we will continue the conversations with you, the viewer, after this.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
This is 10 Questions. I'm Andy Johnson. The distance from where we should be in the world in going forward and our commitments with climate change.
The effects of climate change that cannot be accounted for. It's called loss and damage. And we're seeing loss and damage happening so much more in this decade and the previous decade.
The principal term there was this question of the correspondent banking issues.
That is why we're trying to build capacity with this country here, Trinidad and Tobago, and other countries in the region. Man is not showing any signs of stopping or even slowing down. More than half of the forest in Trinidad is already gone.
All the plants and all the animals and all of the nice clean water and fresh air and everything had to be on this planet for humanity to have a chance.
We have small change when it comes to countries that can take decisions, and when they speak, the world listens.
The General Assembly is a very democratic forum. And Trinidad and Tobago has the same vote as Canada, in spite of the obvious difference in size.
Welcome back to Talking More, ladies and gentlemen. And of course, now is the time we want to hear from you, the viewers. You could call in and have your say. Just remember, please remember, there is a delay. Or if you didn't know, I'm letting you know now. There's a delay between the broadcast and real time. So when you call us, the call will be in real time. The broadcast will be slightly behind. So please do not try to follow the conversation on the TV. Follow the conversation on the phone and mute your TV. With that said, we have our first caller for the morning, Digger Martin. Good morning, caller. You're on the air.
Good morning, Mr. Small, and a very, very good morning to the former Finance Minister, Mrs. Karen Inez-Teixeira. I want to talk a little bit and change discussion. I don't know, I came in late, if you all discuss it. The judiciary and the judicial system, that has to be fixed. We have a big issue. We have Master Caesar here. Apparently, it's functioning as a judge for a whole month now. And we're not aware of that, but if it was in a little piece on the newspaper...
Well, caller, I do believe that was reported in May. That wasn't entirely new.
Right, but
or the expectation was reported. I don't think it maybe was confirmed. But,
right.
Yeah.
The thing, as a former taxpayer, now I'm happily retired, a lot of people paying tax, and we should know how much of our taxpayers' money was spent on that going to the Privy Council, and how much money we had to give Marcia Caesar for not functioning as a judge for the last 2 or 3 years. So that could be a chunk. The way I saw the Privy Council is 2 wrongs don't make a right. The Chief Justice has question to answer on the way he basically tried to dismiss Marcia Caesar. I won't say try to dismiss her and she take him to court. And the Privy Council came back and said he used the wrong approach. I think is Karen, you would probably know, is 137 to get out. The thing I wanted to basically say, why don't we fix the judiciary? Let us find out who was wrong, who was right, to keep who and to dismiss the other, because we're going to be in a whole mess. Patrick Manning has a conviction that Sat Sharma did something untowards. He went to the criminal situation. It collapsed because of McNichols. He used the Mustil impeachment, and he basically, Sat Sharma overcame it, and he went back to be a thing. The fact is, we have 2 sitting, the most senior judge, the Chief Justice, and we have the Ms. Teixeira as a High Court judge. They have question to answer. We as a country must be able to overcome these difficult decision-making to move forward. Gonna have a nice morning.
Miss Caesar, caller, today's Thursday. Karen was on yesterday, just letting you know. But I appreciate the comment because he said it as well. I don't think he listened to me when I spoke about the matter, but he said it as well. 2 wrongs don't make a right. So he did say High Court Judge Teixeira. I believe he meant Marcia Caesar. I can't disagree. It also speaks to perhaps vulnerabilities in how the judiciary is managed, right? And to what extent that could be fixed quickly or not is questionable. To what extent it needs more than, I believe it's a 2/3 majority that the government has. They don't have a 3/4 majority. It might need something even more substantial to make a change to the judiciary. And you're right, as I said as well, the Chief Justice had stuff to answer for. I don't think he had bad intentions, but the problem is what he did could be perceived to potentially have bad intentions. And it's just one of those things where it's difficult to prove, and it's similar to a conflict of interest. That's why you don't go there. You leave it alone. You do it properly. You run the risk, right? And he should have maybe figured out a way to cover himself and say, look, we could do this the easy way or hard way. It's up to you. But don't go back and report on me because X, Y, and Z, right? If you want to go through the process, that's all well and good. Now, I don't know if what he said also included things to pressure her, but I would imagine, because you've seen this situation before, at times part of what's said, and maybe there's undue pressure involved or maybe there's not. It's basically a question of, do you want to go through the whole dog and pony show and get raked over the coals and embarrassed further nationally or not? So it could have been that he did pressure her with very much bad faith intentions, or it could have been that he just wanted to avoid the circus moving forward. And perhaps this is one of those things where maybe if, why does it seem as though all high-profile matters in this country collapse? Think about it. Our success rate for any high-profile matter is probably very low. Very low. This case may have actually gone through, right? Discipline, mass Caesar. But why does it seem as though things just fall apart too easily? And I think it's because maybe perhaps we do things too loosey-goosey. We don't cross T's, dot I's, and make sure that everything, all ducks in a row, all details are squared away, all processes are followed to the letter. And perhaps that's one of the things with regards to this. Because ironically, both wrongs in this matter speak to the fact that the processes failed in part because the individuals involved, the two key decision makers, the former Chief Justice or the Chief Justice or the current High Court judge or whatever, Chief Magistrate, and the current Chief Justice, did not follow proper procedures, whether formal or informal. Okay. Now, I want to go to a comment that was sent to me. It's a long comment, so we can't show everything, and it includes some information. So this is the length of the comment here, right? And essentially, the commenter was advised to send this to me so I could send it to the media ambassadors, to the TTPS, to get further advice. They're experiencing noise pollution to the point where their doctor had to put them on Valium for years. This has been going on apparently for 15 years, right? A cancer survivor that essentially they could no longer sleep or rest in their bedroom. A wall separates the properties between their residents, I don't know if it's a man or a woman, and the business involved. Cannot open their windows. Apparently the business owner or manager or whoever is involved in the operation that is causing noise pollution is saying that they have to move. They should go West Moorings and live. What kind of nonsense is that? Right? The commenter said that they called the police to complain about the loud music at the wee hours in the morning. Apparently, the accused, or the perpetrator in this case, as well as other cohorts of theirs, tried to confront the individual. When the police were called in order to deal with this, with threats of a physical confrontation, the police apparently didn't do much. They only advised that they had to go to a justice of the peace, left them in their yard. The officers told, I mean, apparently death threats were made, but I don't know how serious they were made, because we all know what, I go kill you is like common parlance, not always a literal statement. But essentially, the commentators basically saying the police really didn't do much for the, right? And also potentially to the point where, according to opinions she got after the fact, the individual should have been arrested because, again, they were on our property and they were left there. Apparently, the commentator also went to the courts for 2 years, 6 different magistrates. The defendants apparently didn't show up most of the time. Eventually, the matter was sent to mediation, where there was a document of terms that both sides agreed to, and then after agreeing to the terms, the defendant in this matter did not change their behavior. So I just wanted to highlight the situation for the commentator. I have already forwarded to one of the media ambassadors that's been a talking point. They have already responded and are asking for the individual details, which we hopefully could provide what we have to them, and the matter could, be sorted out. Now, we're not necessarily a call-in to fix your problem show, but at the same time, if we can, we will do so when we can. And a matter like this, where the citizen involved it's not like they're reaching out to a media house because they have a problem and they did nothing about it for themselves. This person apparently has been doing everything that they can and has essentially been stymied. And it speaks to a larger problem where there are questions with regards to the police executing Basic, we ain't talking confrontation of armed drug dealers who are going to shoot them down and mow them down and threaten their families and all kind of nonsense. We're talking about a noise pollution case where potentially, based on what's said, this is technically one-sided, but based on what's said, the perpetrators of noise pollution went beyond the noise pollution and are suffering zero consequences for their actions whatsoever. And then you have to ask, well, who do they know, and who's covering for them, and who's sweeping it under the rug? You have to ask that. Not that it's happening, but you have to ask it. Because it won't be the first time over a noise pollution case that escalation happened, and the escalation, which was severe violence, no one doing nothing about it. Won't be the first time. Because we don't do things properly. We don't do things properly, we're overregulated, and the consequence of our overregulation is corruption has been normalized. And when corruption is normalized, then police corruption eventually gets normalized to some degree or another. And when that happens, all of a sudden, a lot of crap slips through the cracks. We have another comment to get to. Good day. I would assume that if the government appoints the boards of companies of all the state companies, be they majority owned or not, then it's the incoming government's right to appoint or disappoint board members. Well, this is the thing. I believe, technically speaking, when they are not the majority, they don't. When they are the majority, they have the authority, I believe, to appoint the board or not, because just the majority stake, they have, 51% or more of the say. But when they're not, they don't. They don't actually appoint directly who the board is or not. And either way, it has to go through the process. This is the problem. Even if the government is saying we have 51%, and this is what Mariana Brown and Vassamart were saying, the process is you have to go through a board, a shareholder meeting, and the shareholders have to decide. And it's technically a formality, yes, and to some extent you can informally kind of break away from the formality depending if you have majority ownership. But legally, you're supposed to go through the process of the shareholders meet and they vote, or whatever the determining process is, to decide, right? So that's why just the government saying you're fired is a gray area for the majority ownership. For the minority ownership, it's a whole different ballgame. It's a whole different ballgame. Because they did not technically directly appoint. From what I understand, legally, they can't directly appoint. They can't. The process would have had to go through a motion with all of the shareholders, all of the owners involved, and the government not having majority ownership means that their say did not solely put the person there. So not only is it now a formality, now it's a necessity to go through the process on a technical level, right? Which is why this whole situation, yes, it's politically the norm, but it's not legally what is required, or legally, in some cases, what's allowed. So to say that they did do that in the case of minority ownership, I can't say that. I can't say that because that will kind of go against corporate law. We have St. Augustine on the line. Good morning, caller. You on there? Caller, good morning.
Hello.
You're on the air, caller. Go ahead.
Good morning. Sean, yeah, morning.
Mute your TV, caller. The TV, there's a delay. Mute your television, please.
Okay, hold on. Okay, good morning. You hearing me?
Yes. Caller, don't pay attention to the TV. Talk to me over the phone.
Okay, right. Sean, good morning. I'm a Trinbagonian, so it's something I want to see now. I'm visually impaired, so I enjoy this show because I learn a lot what's going on in the country of these shows. But one thing I want to say to Trinidadians and Tobagonians, we're not living in UNC or PNM country. We're living in Trinidad and Tobago. And the people need to understand that politics time finish. We have a government in power, now we change. And people keep hoping that this new government, who inside just for about 1 month, fail. And they have to understand that if they fail, the country will get worse. And it's not about that anymore. If the opposition will stop opposing and try to work together with the government, forget what is the party, work together with the government for the betterment of the country, things will go better. Because everybody keep it party, and that is not it. PNM people have to understand that is the PNM lost the election. The PNM government lost track and ignored communication with the people of Trinidad and Tobago and were focusing on their party and themselves. And that is the reason why they lost the election. So these people have to take that and understand that is not the UNC did anything. The UNC worked hard and they got in there. I'm not a supporter of the UNC or anything. But people have to understand we have to study the country and the betterment of the country. No one forget about party and hoping that this government fails. That is the big problem in Trinidad and Tobago, and we'll just keep going down. The other thing I want to talk about is why it is that every time a high office or a high-ranking official do something wrong, they don't have to pay the consequence for it. And the people of Trinidad and Tobago have to pay. The taxpayers' money have to cover that. For example, this thing with the CJ. The CJ, did he give his order with this letter for the resignation of this judge? And now that passed, now why it is that the government have to pay for all these court things and all the money that passed? 8 years, the government had to pay for that, and he doesn't have to give account for anything. And it has happened with a lot of other things in the country. Trinidadians need to stop studying party, because nobody here born in Africa or born in India. We're born in Trinidad and Tobago. So they have to stop this stupidness and study to build back Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Caller. So 2 good points there. I'll say this. The opposition technically is supposed to be a check on the government. So I won't say that they should stop opposing, but the sentiments that they expressed, I believe, are very correct in the sense that right now, and the UNC did it too, and when they did it, I complained about it when they did it, so it's very, very fair for me to complain about it, that the PNM is doing it. In the first month, the way how they're opposing things that the government are saying, they're not even opposing policies being implemented, but the way how they're doing it is actually very similar to how the UNC did it, and maybe it was similar to how Dr. Rowley did it, but I don't see it very constructive. I don't, because of, in some cases, it's how it's framed. It's what details are included. It's how the arguments are made. It's what the arguments are about. What point on the specific issue, what specific point on the issue is it that they're trying to make? What specific defense or counterclaim? And when you, and the tone of the messaging, and when you add it all up, it's very hard to view it as constructive. And I feel that it's similar to the UNC in opposition. It's aggressive, and it's not always useful, especially now when the current opposition does not understand. Not only does the government need some time to catch up to the situation, right? So you have to give them a little bit of understanding, and rather the country wants to give them a little bit of understanding. So you preempting that does not make yourself look good. You trying to preempt the honeymoon period that the population is giving a brand new government does not make yourself look good at all. It makes yourself look spiteful and stupid. But more importantly, you lost in a manner that says that the country does not give you the benefit of the doubt, does not value your opinion, does not value the words that you say, does not value your policy decisions, does not value the choices you make. So now coming on a high horse saying, we know better as the opposition, 1 month after that defeat is ridiculous. It's not that I dislike people there. I like some people in the opposition. I do. But the position that you're taking and the high horse, the moral high ground that you're trying to stand on makes you look foolish. It's almost like if the only person that doesn't realize who the court jester is in this situation is the court jester himself. That's rhetorical. We have 2 calls waiting. So to the first caller, or the second caller, I will comment on the other point, but we'll have to take the 2 calls first. So we have a call on WhatsApp. Good morning, caller, you on there?
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
Right, I have to comment on a couple of things. First thing, that comment that you read from that person who has been suffering 15 years now, I have some information on that issue, and the death threats won't there were serious death threats, not just
Right,
one,
okay.
as I'm telling you.
Although, just be careful. We don't want to reveal anything.
No. I know, and I want to tell you this. I was happy to hear Mr. Trincity 2 days ago call because I was wondering. I didn't hear from him for quite some time, and he has again repeated what I have been telling you all ever since I started calling. Of governance, poor governance.
Yes.
Hello.
Yeah.
Yes. Poor governance is destroying this country in every facet. No. This person, right, spoke to a senior police officer. On one occasion, the person asked the senior police, "How do you all sleep at night? How do you sleep at night when you can't help me and I'm suffering all this time?" You know what he said to the person? He said, "I sleep very well because I choose where I live." No, I mean, how ridiculous can you get? And Sean, another thing, you have on many occasions spoken about government's failure to deal with noise is a lack of political will. Sean, it's not a lack of political will, it's dereliction of duty. There's no option to deal with noise pollution. It's something that has to be addressed, that should have been addressed. And as I've said before, there have been laws that have always been there. If they were used, we would not have been in this situation today, and it's dishonest for people to simply say, "Oh, the laws are old." No. You all didn't use them, and you all helped create a problem, and all you won't even admit that and simply deal with it. That is dereliction of duty, Sean. Good day and goodbye.
Thank you, caller. Now, when I complain about the laws, that was on the side of enforcement. And I think essentially you basically gave a very good coherent argument where how you introduced it. The lack of governance feeds into the dereliction of duty. And here's why. Essentially, and I said it before, politicians take the easy way out. They do what's easy. They don't know what's hard. They don't want to work hard. And a lack of political will is the easy way. And then now you could basically say that is a dereliction of duty. You're taking the easy way out. You're not actually doing your job. The easy way is to not have to do the hard work and to meet the controversial subject matters and confront them head on. It's to just ignore it because they may perceive that it's not doing anything for their voting base, right? And thus, it's a dereliction of duty. With regards to law enforcement, I'm a bit more forgiving because I understand that it's a little bit more complicated. But for the legislature, I believe you're 100% right. It's a dereliction of duty because at this point, it's been going on for so long and everybody knows what it is, but nothing's being done about it. I wonder why. We have another caller on the line. We have to take the call before we continue. Good morning, caller. You on the air?
Yes.
Morning, caller.
Yes. Good morning, John.
Morning.
Good program as usual.
Thank you.
With regards to the appointment of boards and the replacement of membership on these boards, now I know that we must have some order and discipline about how things are done. And one can understand, yes, that with respect to the majority shareholding where boards are concerned, that you need to have a board meeting to have a change in the directors, particularly when the shareholders would have had an opportunity to elect their representatives. But my question is, the election has been held 1 month ago. Whose owners, or is it not the owners of the board, the incumbent board, to set in motion the meeting as early as possible of the shareholders so as to facilitate a smooth transition that would give any incumbent government the opportunity to appoint their board members as well as the shareholders to appoint their representatives on the board. So my question is, while we are making noise about the fact that these should not resign and they should not because they need to hold a board meeting, my question is, why is it these board meetings were not scheduled, bearing in mind that a month has elapsed, and particularly since there has been a change in government? And if the owner is on the board to have called such a meeting, why haven't they called, and what disciplinary measures could be placed on them? Because they are in fact representatives of the state or representatives of the shareholders. So that's my concern. But you have a pleasant day. Bye.
Thank you, caller. I think it's not so much the board to call a meeting. I think it might be a shareholders meeting. I am not that well versed in corporate law to know exactly what, with regards to the scheduling of that. And if you remember, the election was a snap election. So one could argue it's been 2 months, right? Now, would you schedule a meeting to consider making changes if the government transitions before you know that the government is going to change because of the election results? I don't know. So then you go to a month, right? So apparently they're generally held, annually, and it's scheduled in advance, whatever the fiscal year end and how the various organizations do it. Can you do an emergency meeting? Right now, I guess the company, that's the AGM, right? I'm not versed enough to know. And then I guess to some extent, it would then either be the board or the shareholders to call the meeting. And if it's the case as the shareholders, you have to ask for the minority situations, why didn't they do that? Look, with regards to the board members themselves who are holdovers or who want to hold on to their jobs, I'm not speaking about them. I'm speaking about the fact that the process, to some extent, there's a political process and a legal process, and I think we're kind of, the narrative is confusing the two. And at times the politicians don't have a problem with the narrative being confused. And when I say politicians, I don't just mean the government, I mean the opposition as well. Because if the positions were reversed, and I do believe it happened when the positions were reversed, so let's not kid ourselves. This is something of a norm in the country for decades. But the question is, should it be the norm? I'm not saying that the board members should not be swapped out, but what I am saying is, technically speaking, this might be the wrong process. We have San Fernando on the line. Good morning, caller, on here.
Good morning, Sean.
Morning.
I was very disappointed to see that Marshal Caesar has been reinstated as a judge in the Civil High Court.
Yeah.
And because all it speaks to is so only some people get justice in this country. Those gentlemen and probably ladies who, those 53 cases that she left behind, that where is the justice for those people?
Mm-hmm.
There is none.
Mm-hmm.
None of them have, there's none. And that is my issue with the decision. Because when the Privy Council made the decision, what they said is that they should consider reinstating her. It never said they had to reinstate her. They consider reinstating her. So...
No, but caller, technically speaking, very technically, it's not that I like it, right? On principle, I think without other things being done, you can't not reinstate her. But I will, where my disappointment agrees with your disappointment is, those other things should have been done already, in my opinion, or they should have been started already.
Yes, and those are some of the things that are wrong in this society that has to be fixed. Just like the noise pollution issue.
Mm-hmm.
It bewilders me why it is that no one between the EMA and the police service seems not to want to act on this, What is so difficult with this? Disturbing the peace. I think it's time that, because we know most of the, we have two things, you have the issues that we have with noise pollution is that we have noise pollution coming from the fireworks thing at certain times of the year, and then we have these bars. And then there's an increasing phenomenon where you see people are being granted permission for an event with a music truck, and the problem is that between where the music truck base is and where they're going to, they're blasting music on the way, And those are things that I think can be easily stopped. Because remember we had this discussion with I'm not sure if it was ASP Ali or at one time, and they said that the permission is given for the event, not for the transit to the event.
It might have been Ali, yes.
Yes, not to the transit of the event. And I think the police service needs to be a little more sensitive because they are the ones that are driving around. If you're driving around and there's a bar that you find the music song excessive, you go in there and you give them a warning. You go in there and give them a warning. These are some of the proactive things that they need to start to do. Like, and I hope Alexander understands that when he talked about policing in his statement there, that's what he was talking about, that they started to do policing. And the one last thing before you go, Sean, those vehicles, they are not fit for purpose vehicles, eh?
Well, I did mention that.
Ordinary vehicles that they have put on, they did some amenities, they put the lights in and a couple other things.
Radios, yeah.
Yeah, the radios and stuff. The only people that tried to bring that bid for fit for purpose vehicles years ago was Vemcot. Vemcot had put in a bid that I know of for fit for purpose for these vehicles, and it was rejected because at the time the the Minister of National Security, his name, said that you have to support the local economy. So that's why they were buying from these these local car firms.
I mean, that literally speaks to when I say what your priorities are.
That's right.
And I don't understand how a national security service priority is supporting the local economy over, I don't know, effectively dealing with national security issues.
Welcome to Trinidad and Tobago again. Have a good day, Sean.
I mean, it's not, caller, thank you. It's not limited to us. The craziness is not limited to us. It's just that we don't have reasonable counterpoints in our national story, apparently. We can't have reasonable counter examples. They're all ludicrous examples. That's why people might not like the meme Trinidad is not a real place. And I guess, I think it's very fitting that Tobago is not included in this. Because to some extent, Tobago has a certain level of reasonableness. They're worried about 20 meters in a year. And that's reasonable. We're wishing we could go back to 300. That's technically not normal. For 1.5 million people, 300 meters a year, that shouldn't really be considered good. You know, depending on how you want to live, right? Much less 6. Much less 6. But here's the thing with the noise pollution that I think, I suspect this is the case. Because when you speak to some of the media ambassadors and all of the work that they do in regards to the cases that they're involved in and the officers that they know that work hard, I fear that all of the good officers, for the most part, they're so busy dealing with cases that it's very easy for these things to slip through the cracks of them, because you have to take the police service, you have to cut a fraction off and say that's the good officers, and realize that however big the police service is, the ones that actually do good work is less. And they're swamped. And I do think that because that statement that the previous caller made, where the caller is like, well, I sleep all at night because I choose where I live, kind of nonsense. Again, what's your priority? To be a wise, smart A? Or to actually protect and serve? Because not every member of the TTPS does their job based on the core values. The core values of an organization is what you're willing to sacrifice for. If dealing with crime is part of your vision and mission, and that's what you're willing to sacrifice, then you'll pay the extra money to get better equipment. Technically speaking, that's what Alexander says about body armor, right? He needs more body armor for his people. All right, cool. Money should not be an issue. And I made the case, why is money an issue when saying body armor versus or over body cameras? And it's the same thing for police vehicles. We have to support the local economy. That's political speak. That's a cabinet decision. That's a cabinet decision that's not prioritizing national security then. And to what extent now is, I'm not saying that the current administration is not supporting national security with its purchase, but indirectly, unintentionally, it's not the best decision. And they may unwittingly be falling into some of the same traps, unintentionally. Or maybe intentionally, I don't know. But with regards to the police officers that basically are showing callousness to the people, yeah, those are the bad apples. Those are the ones that are not running themselves ragged, working, you know, overtime into the next morning, not going home to bathe, not eating properly, not seeing about their health, having to deal with obesity symptoms and diabetes symptoms, even if they're not obese, and blood pressure symptoms, and a whole host of personal health conditions due to the mismanagement of their own health, of their bad lifestyle choices, in order to work hard to try to keep this whole thing afloat. That's what's going on in TDPS. It's reached a point now where it is extremely upsetting. Not only do we have to look at the victims being the citizens of the country who are not getting good service, the victims in this whole situation are also those officers of the TDPS that are putting in extra work to try to deal with the situation, but it's one arm tied behind their back because a subsection of their own peers are basically making the situation worse, whether in small ways or in big ways, and adding to their stress and their work. Because they are good officers, they are really good officers. They keep the whole country together with a string and a prayer and hope and twine and duct tape and gorilla glue. But by that sentiment, there's also the other end of the spectrum, and let's not forget it. Let's not. And there's everything in between. Some not so bad, some not so good. Now, one of the things one of the callers spoke to is with regards to this situation, and it was brought up before, but he asked about it or mentioned it again, so I'll speak about it again. The Chief Justice made a decision. It may cost the government money. Now, technically speaking, I can't remember if she got damages, right? But it will cost the government money, potentially in back pay, which I don't think he should be liable I don't think he should be liable for, because if he didn't do what he did, she would have been paid the money regardless, right? But with regards to things like damages or stuff that have to be paid out, and this is more directly or easier seen with regards to police and wrongful arrest and wrongful imprisonment, and then this court basically slaps down a judgment, state has to pay a couple $100,000 to the defendant, right? Should agents of the state have qualified immunity in all circumstances? Because there's precedent set, at least in other jurisdictions where that is not the case. One teenager was arrested. The officers claimed he was drunk. He wasn't drunk. He passed the field sobriety test. He passed multiple iterations of alcohol testing in the station. And essentially, he's suing the two officers involved and the service and the police chief of where he lives in America. And the court basically said, no, the two officers that arrested him wrongfully, they don't get qualified immunity. They don't get to hide behind the fact that they are police officers, thus agents of the states, thus they are not liable. Because what they did was not within the bounds of their duties. It went beyond, right? It was not reasonable. So now the question is, in the case of the Chief Justice, it might still be within the bounds, whether you agree with it or not, but it might still be within the bounds of him doing his job, right? Although technically speaking, yeah, I understand. It probably not, right? But part to some extent, it also depends on where the damages are going to come from or what money people are to. Again, if it's back pay, I don't think he can't be liable for back pay, regardless, right? In this case, at least. But generally speaking, are we willing to look at that? Are we willing to look at that? And I would argue that no one in government has any incentive to allow that to go through, because that opens the door of personal liability for things done on the job as an agent of the state, and they don't want that. Oh, no. Get out of jail free cards are too precious to public servants, members of the government, and the protective services, etc., etc. And then to what extent now will that set a precedent to potentially also, well, the judiciary might be beyond that part of it, but it might be many steps beyond, but not necessarily impossible or not outside of that direction. And I'll just say that there. We're running out of time, so we have to wrap it up now. It's not a red state or a yellow state. It's red, white, and black. There's no yellow in the national flag. I'm sorry, it's just the way it is. I think the PNM lost track of or ignored the people of TNT. They were focusing on not just the party and themselves, but the members of the party. The members on the ground, which is nice, but that doesn't represent the country. And the fact that we want to be divided, I think, is kind of ridiculous. So, who do we want to be as a nation moving forward? There's a reason why I say remember your allegiance to the republic and to each other. And at times I include the fact above all political organizations or any other organization or anything to that effect. Because our allegiance should be to the red, white, and black. The black stripe, the white stripes, the red field, not to the Balize or even the rising sun. We want the current government to do well because they're the government. We wanted the PNM administration and Dr. Rowley to do well because they were the government. Because if they failed, we failed. And hey, we feeling that failure in the pocketbook right now. That's why we changed. We don't hope for this government to fail. If anyone does that, you're hurting yourselves. You don't understand that, you're a fool. Sorry to say. We also don't hope for the opposition to fail. For same reasons. Unfortunately, we can't get what we want. We have to wait and see how this thing turns out, though we're only 1 month in. But your allegiance should be to your country. And a lot of people, and some of it is intentional, think that their allegiance to their party somehow is for the good of the country. And they want to sell us that, but the fact of the matter is it's not. It's not. And you want to know one of the proofs that it's not? It's the fact that the current Prime Minister went outside of her political loyalists of the last 10 years for key appointments to her cabinet. She and all knows that it's not just about party. Now, to what extent will she further express that, further live by that, further allow that to guide the decisions moving forward? I can't see. It could be a good PR stunt. It could be a good political strategy. Or it could be a window to a clue to a political philosophy that I could agree with more than previous political philosophies. We have to wait and see how that turns out. But to me, at the very least, even if it's just lip service, even if it is a mama guy, it is still acknowledging the truth of the matter, that at the end of the day, because it looks good, and it looks good because it shows it's not just about rewarding people for party loyalty. It's about country. And individual political agendas, some of which are very naked to the eye if you pay attention. Now is not the time to be so blatant about it. You want to keep yourself in opposition? Keep doing what you're doing. You want to lose the government in the next election? Fall for that trap. This is why we need a third party, because we can't always rely on the two parties under consideration. We are fortunate that at least for now, the current administration is not falling into the usual pitfalls. That doesn't mean that as a voting public we should be complacent, especially given the fact that at some point the current leader by which this is all being done will have to move on, will have to retire. And we can't just hope that her replacement is able to continue along that line of thinking. That is usually a recipe for disaster. There is no such thing as a benevolent dictatorship that could work as a system. That's an extreme example. Anyway, we have to end. Have a good day. Remember your allegiance to the Republic above all other institutions. Stay safe. And don't forget that it's nice to be nice. We'll see each other tomorrow. Bye-bye.
WESN.
Low energy? Heart concerns? Migraines slowing you down? It's time to take control of your health. Join Wellness Unlocked, the series that brings expert advice and real solutions for a healthier you. In our latest episode, learn how Jameson CoQ10 can help support heart health, boost energy, and even reduce migraines. Get the science, the stories, and the steps to power up your health with CoQ10. Don't miss Wellness Unlocked. Watch now on WESN and start your wellness journey today.
Maybe he landed here totally by coincidence. But if by chance he's admiring your fresh coat of Benjamin Moore soft sky blue, well,